In this presentation, we'll explore definitions and examples of the terms understanding and essential questions. These two elements of the Understanding by Design framework help educators ensure that their curriculum is focused around big ideas that are worthy of inquiry. Developing meaningful understandings and essential questions is a critical step in the first stage of planning a unit of instruction, in which you identify the desired results of the unit. If the individual skills that you are teaching students are the trees, then the understandings and essential questions are the forest which you are trying not to lose sight of. We'll start with defining the term understanding. A good way to grasp what we mean by an understanding is to look at several good and bad examples of an understanding. In the field of mathematics, a good understanding might be operations create relationships between numbers, whereas a bad example would be the terms addition, subtraction, and multiplication. So we can see that an understanding is more than just a list of topics or terms within a discipline. In the study of economics, we might hope for students to understand that price is determined by supply and demand in a free market system. However, the definition, scarcity is a lack of supply to meet demand, is not an understanding, even if it is something that we hope students learn. Therefore, we can say that an understanding is more than the definition of important terms within our field. To look at a final example, we'll explore the language arts. Authentic writing occurs in context, within a genre for a purpose, to an audience. And here is a non-example in the same field. Students will be able to write to diverse audiences for a variety of purposes. So we can see that the term understanding even excludes skills and performance objectives. What elements do the three examples on the left share? Well, for starters, they are all generalizations that can be transferred to a variety of situations within their field. A student who understands, for example, that authentic writing occurs in context can apply that understanding regardless of whether they are writing a research paper for a sociology class or a letter to the editor of their local newspaper. Next, all of these understandings capture the big ideas of a field rather than the discrete skills. The understanding that operations create relationships between numbers is an umbrella that encompasses the smaller skills involved, such as carrying out the procedures for addition and subtraction. With those points in mind, we can arrive at a definition of the term understanding as it applies to the UBD framework. An understanding is a transferable generalization that expresses the big ideas of a discipline. To illustrate this once more, we'll use as an example a student who is studying web design. There are many skills that go into designing a user-friendly experience for web visitors, and our student would likely practice all of these in our course. For example, we'd want them to know to minimize the number of clicks that the user needs to navigate to their desired information. We'd want the student to learn how to design a layout that chunks information into pieces to make for a smoother read. A good web designer also knows that too many font colors or sizes can distract users. And finally, we'd want our student to apply the best practice of limiting each web page to a single purpose. But what is the big idea? The transferable generalization that encompasses all of these discrete knowledges and skills. What is the understanding that we want our students to leave this course with? That in web design, less is more. Now that you know what an understanding is, let's talk about the two types of understandings, overarching and topical. Overarching understandings are comprehensive in scope, casting a wide net over the types of knowledge and skill contained within the discipline. One way to think of them is as program or course level understandings. Topical understandings, on the other hand, cover more specific skill sets and can be thought of as goals at the unit or lesson level. The examples we looked at previously could all work as overarching understandings. Let's look at how they could further be drilled down into topical understandings for a single unit or lesson of instruction. Our example from math was operations create relationships within numbers. In that class, we might have a single unit on multiplication, in which our focus is that multiplication is more than just repeated addition. Likewise, an economics class might want students to understand that price is determined by supply and demand in a free market system. And one lesson could specifically center around the understanding that scarcity in times of natural disaster leads to price gouging. Finally, for our writing course, in which we want our students to grasp the general idea that authentic writing occurs in context, we have one unit on reflection writing, in which we want students to understand that reflective writing is about you, but it is written for an audience. So as you can see, understandings can be written at varying levels of specificity. It's also important to understand that any given overarching understanding could have a near infinite number of topical understandings nested within it. One of the challenges of unit and lesson design is deciding which ones are the most important for your students to grasp. Once you have identified the understandings that you want students to obtain, you can develop essential questions as the basis for lessons which guide students towards understanding. As we did in exploring a definition of understandings, let's look at several examples and non-examples of essential questions to get a better idea of what they are. Do we really need punctuation is a good essential question, whereas what are the 6 common functions of a comma is not. An essential question asks students to do more than just list ideas or demonstrate skills. Our next example might be asked in a film class. Is the film Fargo better classified as a comedy or a tragedy? That is a much deeper question than one that just asks for a definition, such as what is a Shakespearean tragedy? A biology instructor could provoke thought from their students by asking, what would happen if all of the ATP in an organism was spontaneously changed to ADP? Even though this is a hypothetical situation, it still probes a student's understanding of the topic at hand. And while the question, how does ATP provide energy to a cell, might be a good exam question, it isn't a good essential question. So what is an essential question? It doesn't ask for lists, definitions, or processes, but it does inspire curiosity and challenge students to wrestle with ideas. With that in mind, we can define an essential question as a question that leads learners to understanding by provoking inquiry and challenging assumptions. Your essential questions are directly tied to your understandings. An essential question can be the focus of an assignment, activity, lesson, or unit which attempts to lead students to the desired understandings. By exploring the question, students should arrive at the understanding, and likewise, a student who truly grasps the understanding should be able to address the essential question. Let's look at some of the topical understandings we came up with previously in order to see how essential questions lead to understandings. If we want students to understand that multiplication is more than just repeated addition, we could challenge their usual understanding of how multiplication works by asking them, how can we represent 1/3 times 1/2 visually? This essential question is good at provoking inquiry because it is likely to make students realize that their current understanding of multiplication is incomplete. Essential questions can also direct learning by inspiring debate. For example, in our economics lesson focused around the understanding scarcity in times of natural disaster leads to price gouging, we might ask, did the bottled water price gougers during Hurricane Irma act out of greed? This question is likely to spark debate and could work well to guide students towards a greater understanding of the relationship between supply, demand, price, and scarcity. Finally, if we want budding writers to grasp that even though reflective writing is about you, it is still written for an audience, we might ask them, how can you make your experiences matter to your readers? By helping students explore this question, we will show them that even reflections can be written for an audience. As you can see from these examples, essential questions are meant to lead your students to understanding by provoking inquiry and challenging their assumptions. Understandings and essential questions are key components of the first stage of lesson and unit planning, in which you identify the desired results of instruction. The goal of starting the planning process with these elements is to help ensure that every unit of instruction is focused on meaningful, transferable skills. In future stages of unit planning, You will see how understandings and essential questions inform your assessments and learning activities.